Number one thing that you really want to, when you're dealing with the expansion tank and the pumps and the air separator and all that thing, the number one thing you really want to keep an eye on is your system pressure, right? So if you look at this gauge right here, come on back, you guys. That thing's reading about 21, 22 pounds right now. So whenever I walk in a mechanical room, I'm thinking about what these pressures are. So now I see up there, there's a PRV. That's our water makeup valve up there. You see that bronze looking thing that's teeing in and feeding into the, right there above the air separator? Those normally come set from the factory at 12 PSI G, okay? So I got a feeling that's probably what it's set at, 12 PSI G. So if the system was cold, this is down about 6 or 7 feet, so you'd actually see this probably running a couple pounds higher than that. I'd expect to see this gauge at 15 pounds when the whole system's cold. And I'm always looking for that. When I walk into a system, I want to see, okay, what pressures am I dealing with? Now this system is hot right now, and it's running, I looked at the boiler there, it's 115 coming back on the return, 130 going out on the supply. So it is running hot right now, and so the system pressure has built up a little bit. Okay, and because right now I'm seeing 22 on that. So I imagine this gauge probably started right around 15 pounds when the system was cold, and then it charged up there as the system volume started to expand. So all those pressures look good to me, and that's something that I always am. The number one thing that I look at when I walk into the mechanical room is what is going on with my system pressures. And specifically the suction pressure on your big pumps, because that's where the expansion tank always ties in. So if you look at this expansion tank here, you'll see it's looping around here, it's coming over here, and it's tying in right there. And that is on the suction of these pumps, right? And so that's what we call the base pressure for the system. That pressure is the stable pressure that you can always count on. And so you'll also notice that that air separator is right there, right in that same area, and that's where your fill valve is coming in too, and that's just perfect. That's exactly what you want. You want all those items tied right in at that same base pressure, and so all that stuff is kind of working together, okay? So everything looks really good to me there. And then if you look at the pumps, there's a gauge on there that's reading discharge pressure, or actually, yeah, and I think actually there's a couple of, if we shut this off, it's reading differential right now. Now, if we shut that off, I shut off the suction pressure, we should see discharge pressure on there. And I'm seeing about 25 pounds, and I saw that pump was running at 20 hertz. So it's running really, really slow. I'm not sure what you guys are doing with the heat right now, if there's some kind of reheat thing going on and you're dehumidifying or what. I don't know what's going on, but the boiler's running at about 35%. So there's 350,000 BTUs going somewhere. I don't know where, but that's kind of what's going on right now. From a maintenance standpoint, a couple of things that I think are worth pointing out here. There's a strainer on that air separator up there. So that's an air separator with a strainer. So that extra connection up there, that is a flange that can be pulled off, and you can clear out any crud that might come in. It's just catching the big stuff. Right? It's not a fine strain or anything like that, but it can catch any big pieces. Yeah, right. So that is one access point to clean your system. And that water is, of course, flowing in the top of that thing, is making that turn down and coming out the bottom, okay? And then that strainer pole, that when you move that cap there, that'll get you onto the inside of that strainer where it would catch any chunks, okay? So now look, you've got another strainer access right down here at your suction diffusers, okay? So here's your suction diffusers. And so those, actually you've got a couple of strainers. If I'm looking at this, there is a Y strainer right here, and there's also a strainer built into that suction diffuser. Now, one thing about the suction diffusers is they come with a 2-stage strainer, and one is sort of, probably 3/16 diameter holes, and another is a finer mesh in there. Now, typically what's done is they call the finer mesh screen a startup strainer. And so that startup strainer is typically run in the system for the first month or two until you clean it up, get the chunks out of there, the smaller chunks. And then once you get those out, you pull that fine mesh strainer, okay? So that's in your suction diffusers down there. You also have some Y strainers there, it looks like, as well too. And then of course you've got a butterfly isolation valve here, and you also have an ISO valve on this side, and this is what's called a triple duty valve here, or a multi-purpose valve. And so that is a way, there's actually tappings on there where you can verify flow across that thing based on what your handle position is. That's one way to verify flow. But that's also your isolation valve. So if you should have to change the seal on a pump, you would shut off that valve and your butterfly, and then you could get in and change the seal. Now with these particular pumps, one nice thing, these vertical inline pumps like this, they do not require any alignment, okay? It's not like a flexibly coupled base mounted pump where you got to get in there and laser align that thing. That impeller is bolted right up to that motor, okay? So there's no alignment required on these things. However, if you do need to change a seal on these things, you will need to unbolt this ring of bolts, and then you'll need to pull that motor and get it out of the way there and lay it down on the floor, and then you can undo the impeller and then you can get into the seal area, okay? So it is a close coupled vertical inline pump. You know, and they're not, I think these are 7.5, do you remember? I gotta look at the, oh my God, my eyes are not good enough to see that. Yeah, I think it says 7.5. Can you see Malachi? Take a look at that. So anyway, there's a little weight to those, but you might have to get a little triangle or a little tripod cherry picker to pull that out of there. But that's what would happen there. Okay, so that's the pumps, and of course they're hooked up to drives. I don't know the whole control sequence of this, but I would presume that these are probably 100% standby, you know, where you can run one pump and make it happen, and then you can flip it over to the other one. I'm not sure because I haven't seen the whole design on this, but that's probably, they probably don't need to both run. But you guys would have to double check that for me. Let's see. One thing, maybe kind of back to sort of maintenance and preventive maintenance and things like that. One thing that's a really good thing to do, this is an expansion tank here, right? So you'll notice that they did a really nice job on this. They put an isolation valve right here, okay? So we've got an isolation valve that will isolate this tank from the system. And then what you can do is this valve right here, once you isolate the tank from the system, you can pop this and you can drain any water that's laying up in the bladder out of there. And this way you can confirm your pre-charge in your tank. And that's a great thing to do every year, preventive maintenance, to make sure that you don't overexpand this thing or lose your air charge or burst your bladder or anything like that, okay? So that is available to you. They did a really great job. We always ask for this. Sometimes we don't get it, but you've got that isolation valve and that drain valve. So, yeah, that's some maintenance stuff. I'm trying to think what else. Again, your PRV is up high. I believe that's set for 12 pounds. And that fill pressure is great for this system because, you know, we've got some piping stacked up right above us here. But that's as high as the system goes. So a 12-pound fill on this thing, that gives you plenty of pressure. So now look, the other sort of thing you always want to pay attention to in these boiler rooms, you know, we were talking about your start pressure was 12 pounds up here, so about 15 pounds here. So the other thing I'm always looking for too is, hey, what, you know, is my pressure getting too high, right? So how do I determine if the pressure is too high? Well, come back here and you will see a relief valve here. Y'all see that? See that tag on that? What is the rating of that relief valve? I think when I looked at it early, I think, yeah, I hear it. I think it's 50 when I looked at it early. Yeah, so it's a 50-pound relief valve, okay? So when everything's sized up for these systems, we're always, you know, we got that start pressure of about 15, and then you never want to see anything more than typically 45. So that's the, you know, that's the acceptable range of pressures that you could see in this system. If you see something above that, that relief valve is going to start weeping and blowing, and you don't want that, right? So very important, your fill pressure, your relief pressure, your expansion tank, all those things are working together to maintain those pressures in that range. So that's always something that you want to keep an eye on, all right? I think probably worth noting, there is a blowdown on that air separator there, and there's a valve there. Notice there is a cap on that thing. I would always be very careful in dealing with that, because you wouldn't want to pull that cap and then blow that and somebody get sprayed with that. So always be careful with that arrangement, that somebody doesn't get scalded with that. Okay. Let's see. Is there anything else I want to tell you guys about? Do you have any questions?
You talked about the startup screen being basically a month lifespan. It doesn't mean your company can come back and do it.
No, that's always the mechanical contractor is flushing, and they may have already pulled it. I don't know how long this system's been up and running in the sort of the startup mode, but typically as part of their getting the system up and running, they'll monitor that and then they'll pull that startup screen when they've got everything flushed out. No, it's typically always part of the installing contractor's scope. They'll deal with that startup screen. I do see there's some system cleaner chemical, a couple of jugs of that. So it looks like they've probably done some cleaning and system flushing, which is great. And I will tell you, there is also this is not a TACO item, but it's one of the items that was provided as part of the scope of material. There is a pot feeder here. And so that's where you can add any chemical that's needed to the system. And so, of course, you would just isolate that thing out. You'd pop that cap, put whatever you need in there. And so, whatever your chemical treatment folks are recommending with regards to pH and that sort of a thing. So, yeah, any other questions? We are the TACO rep here in Kansas City. We didn't actually supply the equipment. There's another rep over in St. Louis that supplied the equipment because the installing contractor is out of Columbia, Missouri, QuezTech. And but if somebody needs parts or something like that, we're a source for that here in Kansas City. So we're just over in Lenexa. So any questions? Okay. All right.